So we have been covering all of the quote unquote economic stimuluses as it's been occurring on this show. And this pandemic has really been eye-opening as to how much of a complete corporate coup banana republic the United States really is. The federal government has completely turned its back on everybody except for Wall Street and the billionaires and the ruling class, really, the donor class. They basically said, hey, Wall Street, airlines, 1%, here's a blank check, do whatever you want. For the people, they said, here's a one-time $1,200 screw you check, pretty much. And one of the components that we covered on this show was the PPP loans. Now, these were loans that were supposed to go to small businesses, but a lot of actual small businesses never saw any money, or they saw very little money. And one of the things we were saying on this show was this seems like it's by design. The way it was this first come, first serve way, the way they loosely defined what constitutes a small business. Well, there's an organization called the American Small Business League that is doing something about this. In fact, they've actually sued over this entire issue. And breaking it down for me is Lloyd Chapman. Lloyd, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So what's going on? Who exactly are you guys suing? And what is going on? What happened with the PPP loan from your analysis?
Well, we're suing the United States government under the Freedom of Information Act to force them to release the names of all the firms that got the PPP loans and the exact amounts that they received. And the PPP loan program, by the way, I have to compliment you. I've never heard anybody explain that so accurately and concisely as you just did.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, yeah, to tell you the truth. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there, brother. You know exactly what's happening. So the thing that I want people to realize, a couple of things. According to the Census Bureau, 97% of all U.S. firms, excuse me, I take it back, 89% of all U.S. firms have less than 20 employees, and they're responsible for over 97% of all the net new jobs. Think about that. Companies with 20 employees or less are responsible for over 97% of the net new job. This is U.S. Census Bureau data, right? The other thing I want people to realize is the largest economic stimulus program ever passed by Congress for the American people is the Small Business Act. And that was passed in 1953 by Eisenhower. And today that law mandates that a minimum of 23% of all federal contracts go to small businesses. So getting back to the PPP program and all the abuses that you talked about, that's typical. I mean, what we're seeing in the PPP program were billionaires and Wall Street guys and publicly traded companies are getting small business funds. That's gone on for over 20 years. And this is just stereotypical. I was listening to your podcast with Peter Joseph. And by the way, by the way, I've listened to that podcast over and over. You guys, that was fascinating.
Thank you. Yeah.
That was, you and him should do a show like every week. You guys are great together.
I'll let him know that. I'll let him know that.
That was actually incredibly stimulating to hear y'all, talking about that, because you're talking about things that most people don't understand and don't realize, right? But he said that income inequality is the biggest problem in America. And gosh, I've never heard anybody say that before. I mean, I know that that's true. I'll be 71 in December. I've been suing the government for 32 years, and I've never heard anyone say that before. And the biggest problem in this country is economic inequality. And the PPP program is just the latest example where hundreds of billions of dollars that should be going to legitimate small businesses, in my mind, companies with, I'll say, less than 50 employees, actually went to Wall Street billionaires, publicly traded companies, and some huge, huge businesses, right? But it's just the latest example of how corrupt the government has been. It's crazy.
It seems like they did everything to make sure that happened. It seemed like it was just so clearly by design because as I mentioned quickly in the intro, they said this is what constitutes a small business, and it was very loosely defined. And then they had this first come first serve method of getting funds to people. So what do you think is going to happen? Who do you think is going to get their very complicated application in time? the quote small business, quote unquote, that has teams of lawyers working on their application day and night. So as soon as the application process is open, they'll just hit send, or the actual small business that's maybe being run by a family that maybe isn't sure what the future is going to look like. Maybe they're not, maybe they're having to deal with their kids. Like the kids are out of school. What are we going to do? The world is changing. What are we going to do? What are we going to do for our employees? And they're juggling all these things. And they just have time to start the application when it becomes available. Who do you think's going to get that money? Exactly. This is a no-brainer.
Exactly. Again, I have to compliment you. You're the first person other than myself that I've heard say this was by design. And you're exactly right. It was designed.
Other people have said it too, but thank you.
Really, I haven't heard it. I haven't heard it.
Said it too, but
well,
I'll take the compliment. I'm not good at taking compliments.
So think about this. 89% of all the firms have less than 20 employees, right? And Congress knew that. And so they wrote the legislation so that companies with up to 500 employees per location get the money. Think about that. So hypothetically, you could have 1 million employees, but as long as you didn't have more than 500 in one location, you qualified. That's where they went wrong. That's where they went wrong. And then the implementation, by the way, I saw that there was a lawsuit against the banks. The banks showed preference for these big loans. They were getting fees. Let's just say this: it's much easier if you're a bank to process a PPP loan for 30 million and get your money on that than process 60 different loans for 500,000 or something like that, right? Or 600 for 50,000. So the whole thing was designed to show preference to big businesses and to the detriment of legitimate small businesses. So this is just, again, you can go on the internet and search on Fortune 500 firms getting federal small business contracts or corporate giants getting federal small business contracts and see those stories going back almost 20 years into, I think, 2002. But this is just the government, the way they operate. The other thing that I find crazy about this is they let the Small Business Administration administer this program. The SBA's annual budget is around $700 million. And they're charged with the distribution of over 500 billion and 5 million loans. There's no way in the world they could do that, right? Something that I have not seen in the media is that once the pandemic hit and the economic crisis hit, President Trump proposed cutting the Small Business Administration budget for next year. So the only agency in government to help the 30 million small businesses where most Americans work, he's proposed to cut the budget. No one's mentioned that in the national media. But
so getting back to this lawsuit, what was it? Because I remember there was that particular moment where Steve Mnuchin was basically just like, yeah, we're not going to tell you where the money went. We're just not going to tell you. I mean, what basically happened, and this goes beyond the PPP, this goes to basically all the stimulus, was our government, I mean, other governments around the world, and I'm not saying anybody got it completely perfect. I don't think that's possible. No one did. But other governments around the world were basically like, okay, we're going to get people resources to survive because there's a pandemic going on. And by the way, when you provide for people during a pandemic, that's not, quote unquote, giving a handout. That's what a federal government is for. There are a number of things, whatever your political leanings are, there are a number of things that are pretty much indisputable that this is what a federal government is for. One of them is if we have a pandemic that happens once a century, as of right now, hopefully we don't beat that record, going forward, but it happens about once a century. When it happens, the government has your back. Why? Because that's one of the reasons you pay taxes or at least that's what you're told. That's one of the reasons you pay taxes every year. So it's what you're supposed to do. But what the United States government did, essentially, and it's barest nuts and bolts explanation, they said, hey, banks, here's a bunch of money. Do what you want with it. We're going to go on vacation.
That's basically what happened. Yep.
So what spawned this lawsuit? Like when was the point where you guys put the wheels in motion?
Oh gosh, we filed it about 4 months ago. We just found out yesterday that the judge is going to issue her ruling based upon the information that's been provided so far. We filed the motions for summary judgment motion, which is where you're telling the judge, we think you've got enough information, to make a decision. So we filed that several months ago, and there was a case management conference last Friday, and the judge has indicated that she's going to make a decision based upon the information she has. So we're waiting, for them to do that. I would bet money that they won't release the information until after the election. So again, I've been suing the government for 32 years. I've won about 110 freedom of information legal battles against the government. And I can tell by the way they act, what they're trying to do and how damaging the information is. And I would say the information in this PPP loan thing must be very, very damaging for them to be fighting so hard not to release it. This type of information should be on the internet. You shouldn't have to sue the government and spend a lot of money in legal fees to see, who got our tax dollars. My opinion is that the expenditure of our tax dollars should be completely transparent. As Americans, we should be able to see exactly who's getting that money. But with the PPP program, they don't want you to see that. When you applied for a PPP loan, it said in the application the information was going to be made publicly available. So there's really no reason for them not to release it, other than there's some pretty nasty stuff in there that they don't want to come out before the election. So
it's interesting you say that. I mean, I've mentioned this on my show before. A couple of years ago, I was in Scotland, and I went to there was a museum in Edinburgh. I was at. I forget which one it was, but there was a part there that was dedicated to the government, and it kind of explained like the Scottish government and how things go in Scotland. And they had this pie chart where it said how the government spends its resources. And there was a certain section that was color coded for arts and entertainment and culture. And then there was a section for education, and there was a section for military, and there was a section for, other services, and a section for healthcare, et cetera, et cetera. And I took a picture of it and posted it on my Instagram. And I said, if the United States ever had anything like this displayed publicly, it really wouldn't go well, because the entire pie chart would just be war. And then there would be this very tiny, almost like invisible to the naked eye sliver that would just say everything else. That would be what it'd be like for the United States.
Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. You can tweet me an article at Ron Placone. We'll go through it together and make it our own. Get your